"Free me and I will satisfy your needs as a man," said the Apache woman to the lone cowboy. The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows across the dusty trail. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand and rock that seemed to go on forever. The wind carried a dry, hot scent that clung to the cowboy's weathered coat and dusty boots. Band. He had been riding for hours, his horse's hooves stirring up small clouds of dust with every step. The man was a lone figure in this vast land, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but his sharp gaze missed nothing. Psst! Every ridge, every rock, every whisper of movement drew his attention. Out here, life could change in an instant, and a single mistake could cost him everything. He was known to some as the lone cowboy, though in truth, he had no name that anyone truly remembered. His past was a collection of fragments, lost towns, fleeting friendships, and a life shaped by the harshness of the frontier. The years of solitude had carved lines into his face and hardened his hands, but they had also given him patience, alertness, and a quiet strength. The cowboy had learned to read the land as easily as some read a book. The way the wind shifted across the canyon, the pattern of the rocks, even the tracks left in the dirt. These were all pieces of a language he had come to understand. But tonight, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, like the hush before a storm. As he rode along the trail, he noticed the remains of a small camp. The ground was disturbed, the ashes of a fire still warm, and a few scattered belongings lay abandoned. It was a sign of struggle, a story left behind for anyone observant enough to read it. The cowboy slowed his horse, letting it sniff at the air, and he scanned the area carefully. Something had happened here, and it hadn't been peaceful. There were signs of a struggle, a torn piece of cloth snagged on a cactus, footprints that led away from the fire in a hurried, uneven pattern, and the faint scent of sweat and fear in the air. He dismounted quietly, his boots crunching softly against the rocks. The desert had taught him to move without making unnecessary noise. Every step was measured, careful, deliberate. He crouched behind a boulder and looked around. That's when he heard it. A voice, soft, but filled with a mix of defiance and desperation. "Help me," it said. The words were barely audible, almost lost in the rustle of the dry brush. But they were enough. The cowboy's heart skipped a beat, not from fear but from instinct. He had learned long ago that wherever a voice cried out in the wilderness, there was a story behind it, and often danger as well. He followed the sound, moving slowly, letting the rocks and shadows conceal him. The voice came again, this time more insistent. "Please, I can't stay here any longer." He found her near a narrow crevice between two cliffs. She was not hiding completely. She was trapped, restrained in some manner, though not helpless. Her eyes were fierce and intelligent, scanning for escape routes, for anyone who could help her. She was striking, with the sharp features and strong presence of someone used to surviving in a harsh world. Her hair, dark and slightly tangled from her ordeal, fell around her shoulders, and her clothes, though torn and dusty, were practical, built for movement and endurance. When she saw him, her expression shifted. There was calculation there, a careful assessment. She did not plead in the usual way. Instead, she spoke with a boldness that caught him off guard. "Free me," she said, her voice steady, "and I will satisfy your needs as a man." The words were provocative, yes, but there was more to them. They were a challenge, a test. She was measuring him, seeing if he was the kind of man who could act without hesitation, but also with integrity. In the desert, words like these were often about survival, not desire. The cowboy felt a flicker of surprise, but he did not respond immediately. He studied her carefully, trying to read her motives, her character, the truth behind the words. Aspirations. For a long moment, Silence stretched between them. The wind whispered through the canyon, and a lone hawk cried overhead. The cowboy weighed his options. He could leave, as he had many times before, continue along his path and ignore the trouble. But something about her presence, her strength, and her courage held him in place.
He saw that she was capable, not just relying on others to save her.
There was a fire in her eyes that told him she had faced dangers he could only imagine. And yet, she was trapped now, for reasons he did not fully understand. That alone was enough to compel him to act. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "Who did this to you?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she answered without hesitation. "They wanted to use me, control me, but I am no one's possession. I escaped, but only barely. They are still near. If you help me, I can help you." Her words were layered. There was danger, yes, but also a promise of alliance. She was offering him a choice. Take a risk and gain an ally, or turn away and continue the lonely path he had always known. The cowboy considered her offer. Out here, survival depended not just on strength, but on alliances, on knowing when to trust and when to remain cautious. He had learned to read people as he read the land, and he saw the truth in her eyes. She was not making idle promises. She was capable, smart, and resourceful. And most importantly, she was free in spirit, even if her body was restrained. That combination was rare and valuable in a world where betrayal and danger lurked around every bend.
With careful hands, he worked to release her restraints.
She watched him with an intensity that made the air between them electric with anticipation and tension. It was not just a physical act of freeing her. It was a gesture of trust, of recognition. He did not rush, understanding that every movement mattered. When the last bond fell away, she stretched her arms and legs, her eyes never leaving his. There was no immediate gratitude expressed in words. Her gaze conveyed something deeper, a shared understanding that both of them had stepped into a situation that could change everything. As she stood, dusting off her clothes, the cowboy felt the weight of the moment. This was not just a meeting between two strangers. It was the beginning of a journey, one that would test their courage, their wits, and their sense of honor. She was no damsel in distress, and he was no ordinary hero. Both were shaped by the harshness of the frontier, and both understood the delicate balance between danger and opportunity. They began to move together, cautiously, aware that the desert held more than just heat and wind. Every rustle of brush, every distant sound could signal a threat. Yet there was also an unspoken rhythm between them, a sense that they could rely on each other in ways neither had anticipated. The cowboy rode slightly ahead, scanning the path, while she followed with nimble, sure-footed movements. They were two souls temporarily bound by circumstance, learning the value of trust and timing in a world that offered little forgiveness. As night began to fall, painting the desert in deep oranges and purples, the two found a small sheltered spot near the base of a cliff. They made a modest fire, and for the first time in days, there was a sense of temporary safety. The woman, finally able to speak freely, told bits of her story, carefully, without revealing too much, yet enough to hint at the danger she had faced. The cowboy listened, understanding the weight of her experiences, recognizing in them echoes of his own solitude and the harsh lessons the frontier had taught him. By the time the stars dotted the sky, the fire crackling softly between them, there was a fragile bond forming. Brash. It was built on respect, on recognition of each other's strengths, and on the quiet acknowledgement of shared danger. The night was full of possibilities, but also of caution.
They had survived the first test, but the journey was far from over.
But yet in that moment, There was a sense of connection that neither could ignore, a promise that the coming days would reveal not only the challenges of the land, but the resilience of two people who had found each other in the vast emptiness of the frontier. The morning sun rose slowly, casting pale gold light over the jagged cliffs and sandy trail. The air was dry, but it carried a fresh coolness that hinted at the coming day. The cowboy stirred first, careful not to wake the Apache woman. He had slept lightly, his mind alert to every sound, the distant caw of a crow, the soft rustle of the wind through the brush, the faint movement of his horse shifting in its sleep. Even in sleep, he never let himself fully relax. Out here, danger could come without warning. The desert was beautiful, yes, but it was also merciless, testing those who dared to cross it. He glanced at her, lying nearby on a simple blanket she had spread over the rock. The woman's hair was messy from the night, but there was a strength in her posture even in rest. She was awake now, her eyes opening slowly, scanning the horizon as if she could read the land before the sun fully rose. The cowboy admired that alertness. He had seen many travelers falter in the harsh wilderness. But she was different. She was quiet, but her calm was a shield, a way of measuring danger and opportunity all at once. Rest. She sat up, stretching her arms and shoulders. "We should move soon," she said, her voice firm, yet without the slightest trace of fear. "They may still be tracking me. If we linger, it will only get worse." He had seen the signs yesterday, the disturbed camp, the hurried tracks. Whoever had held her captive was not far behind, and they were likely desperate to reclaim what they had lost. They packed their meager belongings quickly, their movements synchronized almost instinctively. The cowboy saddled his horse while she secured hers, and together they set off along the winding desert path. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was filled with unspoken communication. Each glance, each shift of weight, each careful step through the rocks and brush was a conversation. They were learning to trust each other without words, a skill essential in a land where a single mistake could be deadly. Hours passed as they moved steadily, navigating the uneven terrain. The desert was not as empty as it seemed. Birds darted overhead, and the occasional small animal scurried across the rocks. The sun climbed higher, baking the sand and stone, but the cowboy and the Apache woman pressed on. The journey was exhausting, yet every step taught them something about each other. He learned of her skill in moving quietly over difficult ground, of her keen sense of direction and knowledge of hidden water sources. She learned of his patience, his caution, and the sharpness of his instincts honed over years of solitary travel. Midday brought a small, narrow canyon. The shadows provided welcome relief from the harsh sun, and they paused to rest. The Apache woman knelt by a small pool of water, cupping her hands to drink. She offered the cowboy a share without a word, and he accepted, grateful for the gesture. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes. In this unforgiving land, sharing water was a sign of trust, of mutual respect. They ate their meager rations in silence, each lost in thought, yet aware of the other's presence. Finally, curiosity overcame the cowboy's caution. "Why did they want you?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. She paused, her eyes focused on the rippling water. "Power," she said simply. "They saw me as a tool, a way to control others, but I've never been anyone's property. Never." Her words were calm, but they carried weight. He nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had seen the same desire for control in towns he had passed through, in men who thought strength gave them the right to dominate. He knew the truth of her words, and he respected her even more for speaking them so plainly. They traveled again, the sun inching lower in the sky. As the afternoon wore on, the tension of potential pursuit never left them. Every rock, every ridge could hide danger. The Apache woman moved with careful purpose, stopping to examine tracks in the sand, noting the direction of the wind. She spoke occasionally, her words measured. "They're close," she said, narration. "We may need to hide or defend ourselves if necessary." The cowboy understood the weight behind her words. This was not bravado, it was experience speaking. She had survived before, and she would survive again if he could match her skill and judgment. As they climbed a ridge to survey the land ahead, a distant shout carried on the wind. "Brave." The cowboy stiffened, raising his hand to signal her to pause. She crouched low, eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. A group of men, roughly half a dozen, were approaching, moving swiftly across the open desert. Breaths, they were armed, their intent clear in the way they moved. They had not given up. The cowboy felt a familiar tension settle in his chest, a combination of fear and focus.
He had faced threats before, but there was something different about this one.
This was personal, and it demanded strategy rather than brute force. They ducked behind a boulder, keeping low, and began to plan. The Apache woman studied the men carefully, noting their numbers, their pace, and their behavior. "We can outsmart them," she whispered. "We know the land better than they do. We can use the rocks, the cliffs, and the canyon paths. They will follow what they think they understand, but we will be ready." The cowboy nodded, silently, admiring her confidence and intelligence, but she was not relying on him, but rather expecting partnership. He respected that. For the next several hours, they maneuvered through the desert with careful precision. They avoided open areas, sticking to hidden paths and narrow passages. The cowboy watched as she moved, noting how instinct guided her, how every movement had purpose.
It was as if she was a part of the land itself, reading it, moving with it, bending the harsh environment to her advantage.
He learned from her just as much as she learned from him, and each lesson strengthened their bond. As evening approached, they found a small cave tucked into the base of a cliff. It offered shelter from the wind and a vantage point to observe the surrounding area. They settled in, quiet for a moment, letting the tension of the day fade slightly. The Apache woman tended to a small fire, while the cowboy checked the perimeter, ensuring no one had followed too closely. It was a moment of temporary peace, but the knowledge of potential danger lingered. They were not out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. During this quiet time, the cowboy began to understand her more deeply. She was not just a survivor, she was a fighter, a strategist, and a teacher. She had lived in a world that demanded courage, and she had met it at every turn. And yet she was also human, capable of fear, of doubt, and of longing. He realized that their journey was not just about evading pursuers. It was about learning from one another, about sharing strength, and about discovering trust in a world that rarely offered it freely. Bah. Night fell, bringing a cool darkness over the desert. The stars shone brightly, scattered like jewels across the sky. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat near the fire, the silence between them comfortable now, filled with the shared understanding of the day's struggles and victories. "We've made it this far," she said quietly, not looking at him but letting the words hang in the night air. "Tomorrow will be harder, but we will face it together." The cowboy nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Together.
And supper came, a lazavida savai and zai and then died.
It was a simple word, but in the harshness of the frontier it carried immense meaning. As they rested, the cowboy reflected on the morning, the struggles, and the subtle unspoken bond forming between them. He realized that this journey was already changing him. The loneliness he had carried for so many years felt less absolute now. There was a companion beside him who could match his wits, his courage, and his skill. And while the dangers of the desert had not disappeared, he understood that with her by his side they were stronger than either could be alone. The night passed quietly, the fire dwindling to embers, and when dawn came they would rise again to face the unknown. But for now, the cowboy allowed himself a rare moment of calm, a brief acknowledgement that survival was not just about strength, but about connection, trust, and the courage to face danger alongside someone who understood you. And the Apache woman, sitting near him, felt the same quiet relief. In the vast, unforgiving desert, they had found not only safety for the moment, but a partnership built on respect, skill, and an unspoken promise that they would face whatever came next together. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and sun-warmed sand. The cowboy stirred first, as was his habit, listening to the desert awaken. Birds called to each other from distant cliffs, and the wind whispered through the rocks, creating a soft, eerie sound that echoed across the canyon. He rose carefully, stretching his stiff muscles and letting his eyes adjust to the early light. Beside him, the Apache woman was already awake, crouched near the fire, inspecting the ground. Her eyes scanned every detail, every footprint, every shifted rock. Even after all they had faced, she was alert and cautious, fully aware that the desert offered no second chances. But "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice steady, almost commanding, but with a warmth that was rare in her tone. "The trail ahead is tricky. Water is scarce and the terrain will test us more than it has so far. If we rest too long, they could catch up." The cowboy nodded, appreciating her foresight. She spoke not just from caution, but from experience, understanding the land in a way that came only from living close to it, studying it, and surviving it for years. Breaths. They packed their small camp quickly, the cowboy's hands sure and practiced as he secured the horse saddles and gathered supplies. She moved with quiet precision, double-checking their belongings and scanning the horizon for signs of movement. But together they formed a rhythm, each aware of the other's actions, each learning from the other's skill. Though they had only known each other for a short time, the bond between them was growing, built on necessity, respect, and the unspoken knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. As they rode along the rugged canyon trails, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to rocky hills and narrow passes, paths that twisted unpredictably between cliffs and boulders. The Apache woman led the way, her knowledge of the land evident in every careful step. She showed the cowboy how to read the subtle signs left by travelers, animals, and even the wind.
"Look here," she said, pointing to a faint track. "This isn't recent. It tells us they came this way, but not yet."
"We have a window." The cowboy studied the marks, impressed by her skill.
She was not just surviving. She was navigating, predicting, and planning, all at once. Hours passed as they moved through the maze of rock and sand. The heat of the day grew intense, and the cowboy could feel the sweat soaking through his shirt. Yet neither spoke complaints. Their focus was absolute, their attention on the trail and on each other. Occasionally, she would point out hidden water sources, little depressions in the rocks that collected rainwater, or shaded spots where the air was cooler. Each of these discoveries was small, but in the desert they were life-saving. He began to understand that her knowledge was not just survival, it was mastery of the land itself. By midday, the sun was high, glaring down, turning the desert into a blinding landscape of light and shadow. They found a small, sheltered ledge under a rock overhang. Here they paused, letting their horses rest while they drank and ate. The Apache woman shared some dried fruit and jerky, offering half to the cowboy.
"We need to keep our strength up," she said. "Tomorrow, the path will be more difficult."
"Rocks, cliffs, and waterless stretches will test us. We must be ready." Her voice carried both warning and reassurance. The cowboy nodded, understanding her wisdom. He had faced hardships before, but she had an uncanny ability to see beyond the immediate danger, to prepare for what was still coming. As they rested, he found himself studying her more closely. But she was more than just skilled. She was brave, clever, and unyielding. But she was also human, with moments of doubt and vulnerability hidden beneath her strength. He could see it in the way she sometimes paused to catch her breath, in the flicker of worry in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. He realized that the desert had not hardened her entirely. It had sharpened her, honed her into someone who could survive, yes, but also someone who could teach, lead, and inspire. After a short break, they resumed their journey. The canyon twisted and narrowed, forcing them to pick their way carefully. One wrong step could send a horse tumbling, or leave them stranded. At one particularly narrow pass, the cowboy noticed fresh footprints in the dust, signs of those who had pursued the Apache woman before. He signaled her, pointing quietly to the marks. She examined them quickly, her brow furrowed. "They're getting closer," she whispered.
We must move faster, but carefully. One mistake and they'll have the advantage. They pressed on, moving with deliberate caution.
The cowboy learned to follow her lead, observing how she chose paths that were difficult for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain, paths that gave them cover and concealment while slowing anyone who might follow. She had a natural understanding of how to use the land to their advantage, and he could see why she had survived on her own for so long. Her movements were almost like a dance, fluid and precise, yet with a strength that spoke of countless challenges faced and overcome.
By late afternoon, they reached a small stream winding through a shallow valley.
Water was a rare blessing in this harsh land, and they paused to let their horses drink while they refreshed themselves. The cowboy watched her carefully, noticing how she approached the stream, scanning the horizon for threats even as she drank. But she was cautious, but also confident, and her focus never wavered. It was a balance he admired, a combination of vigilance and skill that kept her alive in a world that demanded constant alertness. As they prepared to move again, a sudden sound of shouting echoed through the valley. The cowboy stiffened, instinctively reaching for his gun. The Apache woman crouched low, scanning the direction of the noise.
"They found our trail," she said quietly.
"We must be ready. The path ahead is dangerous, but we can outsmart them if we remain calm."
The cowboy nodded, feeling the familiar rush of tension.
He had faced threats before, but this was different. These pursuers were not just random bandits. They were determined, and they knew the land well enough to track them. The challenge required more than strength. It required intelligence, patience, and coordination. They moved quickly but carefully, using every rock, boulder, and shadow to shield themselves. The Apache woman led the way, showing the cowboy how to stay hidden, how to anticipate movement, how to choose paths that would mislead those following them. He followed her guidance, trusting her judgment completely. Together they became a single unit, moving with a precision born of shared necessity and growing trust. Every glance, every hand signal, every pause was part of a silent conversation that allowed them to survive in the harsh open desert. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink behind distant hills, casting long shadows that stretched across the landscape. They had managed to evade immediate danger, but the threat was far from gone. The cowboy and the Apache woman found a sheltered ledge overlooking the valley, a spot where they could rest and plan for the next stage of their journey. As they settled, the cowboy finally spoke, breaking the quiet that had grown between them. "You've taught me more in a day than I've learned in years on my own," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. She looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "We learn from each other," she replied. "Alone, survival is harder. Together, we have a chance to do more than just survive." That evening, as they sat near the fire, the cowboy reflected on the day's journey. The Apache woman had not just guided him through the land, she had taught him about trust, strategy, and the strength found in partnership. He realized that he had underestimated the power of companionship, the way two people could complement each other, each filling in the gaps left by the other's experience. He understood now that survival was not just about strength, skill, or courage. It was about connection, awareness, and learning to rely on someone else when it mattered most. Night fell, and the desert grew quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind or distant animal. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the rocks around them. The Apache woman sat near the embers, her eyes scanning the horizon even in the darkness. The cowboy watched her, feeling a quiet admiration and respect. She was fierce, brave, and capable, yet also human, with moments of doubt and need. In the harshness of the frontier, she had survived not because she was invincible, but because she knew when to act, when to wait, and when to trust. As they rested, the cowboy realized that their journey had changed him. The solitude he had carried for so long felt less heavy, less necessary. He had found someone whose strength matched his own, someone who could teach him, challenge him, and walk beside him in the face of danger. And for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to hope, not just for survival, but for a bond that was rare and precious in a world that offered so little certainty. The sun had not yet risen when the cowboy and the Apache woman reached the edge of the canyon. The sky was a pale gray, slowly brightening as dawn approached. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of wet stone and desert plants. The cowboy dismounted silently, letting his horse graze nearby while he surveyed the landscape.
The Apache woman moved beside him with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning every ridge and rock formation.
There was tension in the air, thick and unrelenting. They both knew that today the danger they had been evading would confront them directly. "They're close," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She crouched low, pointing toward the distant ridges where shadows moved among the rocks. The cowboy followed her gaze and saw the shapes of men moving carefully, keeping low, their intentions clear. These were not ordinary travelers. They were determined, experienced, and armed. Pursued her so relentlessly. Would not stop until they got what they wanted. The Apache woman crouched beside him, speaking softly but with a tone that demanded focus.
"We can't face them in open ground," she said. "They have numbers, and we only have the advantage of the terrain."
"If we plan carefully, we can lead them into a trap."
The cowboy nodded. He had faced many dangers before, but the way she analyzed the situation, predicting the moves of their pursuers, was remarkable.
Her strategy was precise and intelligent, not reckless, and he trusted her judgment completely. They began to move along the ridges, keeping low and silent. The Apache woman led the way, showing him the hidden paths, small ledges, and narrow passages that would give them an advantage. The men following them were skilled trackers, but they underestimated the knowledge the woman had of the land.
Every step they took was deliberate, each movement calculated to avoid detection while guiding the pursuers into areas where they could control the engagement. The cowboy watched her closely, learning from her instinctive understanding of the terrain.
Hours passed as they maneuvered through the twisting cliffs and narrow canyons. The pursuit was close, but neither the cowboy nor the Apache woman faltered. They were a single unit, moving in harmony, anticipating each other's actions without needing to speak. Every rock, every shadow, every sudden sound became part of their strategy. The Apache woman whispered instructions, and the cowboy followed them with precision. Their shared focus created a bond that was unspoken but undeniable, a trust forged in the heat of danger. Finally, they reached a narrow canyon that opened into a small, flat area surrounded by steep cliffs. The Apache woman stopped and gestured for the cowboy to follow. "Here," she said quietly. "This is where we can turn the tables.
We'll force them into a position where their numbers won't matter, where the land works for us instead of against us."
The cowboy nodded, studying the surroundings. The cliffs on either side were jagged and steep, providing cover and height. Rocks and boulders littered the ground, offering opportunities for defense and distraction. This was exactly the kind of terrain they needed to confront their pursuers effectively. As they prepared, the Apache woman explained her plan.
"We'll stay hidden until they enter the canyon. Then we'll use the rocks to block their path and create confusion. They'll be forced to move carefully, and we can control their approach."
Stay close and follow my lead. The cowboy acknowledged her instructions. He had faced ambushes before, but this plan was different. It relied not on brute force, but on intelligence, coordination, and precise timing. He was ready. The first shadows appeared at the canyon's entrance. The men were cautious, scanning the area for signs of the two they pursued. The Apache woman signaled to the cowboy to stay low, and together they waited. Their hearts pounded, but their movements were controlled, deliberate. As the men entered the canyon, the Apache woman gave a subtle nod, and the cowboy pushed a small boulder, causing a loud rumble that echoed through the canyon. The sound startled the pursuers, forcing them to pause and look around. Rocks above the canyon edge shifted slightly, sending small stones tumbling down. The pursuers scrambled to maintain balance, their formation disrupted. The Apache woman moved swiftly, using the terrain to her advantage. She signaled to the cowboy to flank one side while she maneuvered another. The men, confused by the sudden movement and noise, could not anticipate their next move. But every action the Apache woman took was calculated, designed to confuse, slow, and control the pursuers. The cowboy followed her instructions, using rocks and shadows to create further obstacles and distractions. They were no longer simply evading, they were taking control. The confrontation escalated as the pursuers realized they had been trapped. The canyon walls amplified every sound, every movement. The men shouted, their voices echoing, but the cowboy and the Apache woman remained calm, focused, and precise.
The Apache woman demonstrated remarkable agility, moving quickly from cover to cover, guiding the cowboy and making use of the narrow passages. Each step was strategic, each gesture purposeful.
The pursuers were skilled, but they were reacting, not planning. The advantage had shifted entirely to the duo who knew the land intimately. In the heat of the confrontation, the cowboy felt a surge of admiration for the woman beside him. Her courage, intelligence, and skill were extraordinary. She faced danger not recklessly, but with a clear understanding of what was at stake and how to control it. He realized that her strength was not just physical. It was mental, strategic, and unwavering. And in that realization he felt something more, a deep respect, a bond that went beyond mere survival. As the confrontation reached its peak, the pursuers attempted to regroup and push forward. The Apache woman anticipated their movements, signaling to the cowboy to shift position. Together they used boulders and natural cover to block paths, slow advances, and control the engagement. Their combined efforts created confusion, frustration, and hesitation among the pursuers.
Every step, every decision, every movement was executed with precision. Finally, the remaining pursuers, exhausted, frustrated, and disoriented, began to retreat.
The cowboy and the Apache woman did not pursue. There was no need. They had gained the upper hand, controlled the situation, and proven that intelligence, skill, and teamwork could overcome even significant numbers. The canyon returned to silence, the echoes of conflict fading into the wind. The cowboy exhaled slowly, his muscles relaxing for the first time in hours. He turned to the Apache woman, who stood near the canyon edge surveying the retreating figures. Her face was calm, composed, and confident. She had faced danger and survived, not because of luck, but because of skill, preparation, and courage. The cowboy felt a deep sense of admiration and respect. She was extraordinary, and he was grateful to have faced this trial beside her. They took a moment to rest, drinking from a small hidden pool and letting their horses recover. The Apache woman spoke softly, recounting the subtle movements and decisions that had ensured their success. The cowboy listened carefully, absorbing her lessons and reflecting on how her knowledge and intuition had guided them through the confrontation. He realized that this journey was not just about survival, it was about learning, growing, and understanding strength in its many forms. As night fell, they set up a small camp in the canyon, far from any path or trail. The fire cast a warm glow on the rocks, illuminating their faces in the small circle of safety they had created. The Apache woman tended to the fire, while the cowboy checked the surrounding area, ensuring that no danger remained. The events of the day had tested them both physically and mentally, but they had prevailed, not through sheer force, but through strategy, teamwork, and resilience. Sitting near the fire, the cowboy reflected on the confrontation. The Apache woman had not only survived, but had led him through a situation that could have ended badly. Her courage, intelligence, and skill had been vital, and he understood that he had learned more from her in a single day than he had in years of wandering alone. He felt a quiet admiration, a sense of partnership, and the beginning of a bond forged through shared trials. The Apache woman looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Breaths. There was no boastfulness in her gaze, only quiet confidence and a subtle acknowledgement of their shared experience. "We are stronger together," she said softly. The cowboy nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. They had faced danger, tested their limits, and emerged victorious, but the journey was not yet over. There were more challenges ahead, and the bond they had formed would be essential in facing whatever came next. The night grew deep and quiet, the stars shining above the canyon like a scattered sea of diamonds. The cowboy and the Apache woman settled near the fire, each lost in thought but comforted by the presence of the other. They had faced danger together, relied on each other, and survived. In the harshness of the frontier, that was more than a victory. It was a connection, a partnership, and a rare moment of trust that could withstand anything the land would throw at them. The morning sun rose slowly over the canyon, casting soft light across the jagged rocks and warm, sandy ground. The cowboy and the Apache woman stirred, stretching their muscles and letting the calm of dawn wash over them. The canyon was quiet now, silent except for the occasional rustle of the wind or the distant cry of a hawk. After the chaos of the previous day, the stillness was almost surreal, a reminder of the fragile peace they had earned through courage, skill, and careful planning. The Apache woman rose first, moving with grace and quiet purpose. She tended to the horses, checking their saddles, hooves, and water supply. Her actions were precise and methodical, showing the same intelligence and attention to detail that had guided them through the confrontation with their pursuers. The cowboy watched her, noticing how confident and self-reliant she was. Breaths. He had come to admire not just her skill, but her determination, her courage, and the way she carried herself in a world that had demanded so much of her. "We should keep moving," she said softly, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. "Even though they are gone, we cannot be careless. The desert can change quickly, and threats can appear when you least expect them." The cowboy nodded, appreciating her wisdom.
He had learned over the years that survival depended not just on strength, but on constant vigilance, foresight, and adaptability.
She embodied all of these qualities, and he was grateful to have her guidance. As they prepared to ride, the cowboy finally spoke. "You've led me through this journey, through danger and uncertainty. I've learned more from you than I've learned in years on my own." The Apache woman looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "We learn from each other," she replied. "Alone we survive. together we grow stronger. That is what the desert teaches those who are willing to listen."
Her words carried a quiet power, a reminder that their journey was more than just a fight for survival. It was also a lesson in trust, respect, and partnership.
They set off along a narrow trail that wound through the canyon and into the open desert beyond.
The terrain was challenging, with steep cliffs, shifting sand, and hidden obstacles, but they moved with confidence and coordination.
The cowboy followed her lead, trusting her instincts and decisions completely. Every step, every movement was deliberate, ensuring that they stayed safe while covering ground efficiently. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a vast landscape of stone, sand, and sky, yet it felt less daunting now that they faced it together. As the day wore on, the conversation between them became easier, more relaxed. They spoke of their pasts, of experiences that had shaped them, and of the lessons they had learned in the harshness of the frontier. The cowboy shared stories of lonely trails, towns he had passed through, and the quiet moments of reflection that had defined his life. The Apache woman spoke of her own challenges, of survival in a world that often underestimated her, and of the resilience that had carried her through countless dangers. A deeper understanding grew between them, a recognition of shared strength and determination. By afternoon, they reached a small, hidden oasis tucked between cliffs. Fresh water shimmered in the sunlight, and a few trees provided shade from the relentless sun. They stopped to rest, letting the horses drink and grazing their weary animals. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat near the water, taking a moment to breathe and reflect on everything they had faced. There was a sense of quiet triumph, a satisfaction that came not just from surviving, but from having done so with skill, intelligence, and courage.
"You're free now," the cowboy said softly, looking at her.
"Free to make your own choices, free to decide where your path leads." The Apache woman nodded, a look of relief and determination in her eyes.
"Yes," she replied.
And that freedom is worth more than anything else. But freedom is not just about escaping danger. It's about choosing your path, standing strong and facing the world on your own terms.
Her words carried wisdom and strength, a reflection of everything she had endured and overcome. They spent the evening near the oasis, tending to their horses and preparing a small meal.
The sky turned a brilliant orange as the sun set, casting long shadows across the sand and cliffs. The cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years, a quiet contentment that came from having faced danger, survived, and shared the experience with someone he respected deeply. The Apache woman moved with quiet confidence, her presence a reminder of resilience, skill, and determination. Together, they had navigated the desert, confronted danger, and emerged stronger than before. As night fell, the stars appeared above, shining brightly in the clear desert sky. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat near the fire, the flickering light reflecting in their eyes. They did not speak much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with understanding and mutual respect. In that quiet moment, they both reflected on how far they had come, the dangers they had faced, and the lessons they had learned. Their journey had not just been about survival. It had been about connection, trust, and the realization that strength could be found not only in oneself, but in the partnership forged through shared trials. Eventually, the cowboy spoke again, his voice low and thoughtful.
I used to think that being alone was the only way to survive out here. That solitude was a shield.
But I've learned that trust, respect, and partnership are just as important.
You've taught me that.
Respect. The Apache woman nodded, her eyes meeting his.
The desert is harsh, but it also teaches those who pay attention. It teaches respect for the land, for others, and for oneself.
We've learned much, and we are stronger because of it. Their shared understanding was profound, a recognition of the growth, strength, and wisdom gained through their journey together.
The next morning, they prepared to part ways. The Apache woman was free, with the knowledge, confidence, and determination to face the world on her own terms.
The cowboy had learned lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. The importance of trust, the strength found in partnership, and the courage required to face both danger and human connection. They stood together for a moment, taking in the vast landscape of desert, cliffs, and sky, understanding that their paths were diverging but that the experience they had shared would remain with them forever. "Thank you," the cowboy said finally, his voice quiet but sincere. "For everything. For showing me that strength can come from more than solitude. That courage can be shared." The Apache woman smiled, a mixture of warmth and resolve in her expression. "And thank you," she replied, "for trusting me, for walking beside me, and for seeing more than just danger in me. Freedom is ours now, and the choices are ours to make." With that, she mounted her horse and rode off toward the horizon, her figure silhouetted against the rising sun. The cowboy watched her go, a mixture of pride, respect, and quiet admiration in his heart. He knew that she would face challenges ahead, as the desert was never truly forgiving, but he also knew that she was capable, strong, and free. Her journey was hers to define, and she would face it with the same courage and wisdom that had carried them through their shared trials. The cowboy lingered for a moment, taking in the peaceful desert scene. The wind whispered across the canyon, carrying the scent of sand, stone, and sagebrush. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a quiet contentment that came from having faced danger, survived, and grown through the experience. He mounted his horse and began to ride along the trail once more, carrying with him the lessons of trust, partnership, and courage. Though he would return to solitude, it would no longer feel empty. He had learned that connection could exist even in the harshest landscapes, and that strength could be shared without diminishing one's own. As the day progressed, the cowboy rode with a steady pace, reflecting on everything he had witnessed and experienced. The Apache woman's bravery, intelligence, and unwavering determination had left a lasting impression. He understood now that survival was not simply about avoiding danger. It was about learning from it, facing it with skill and courage, and finding trust and respect where it mattered most. Every moment of their journey had shaped him, changed him, and strengthened him in ways he had never expected. Even as the canyon disappeared behind him and the desert stretched endlessly ahead, the cowboy carried with him the memory of the Apache woman, her wisdom, her strength, and the bond they had forged. Their paths had crossed at a moment of danger, and in that crossing they had found not only survival but understanding, respect, and a connection that transcended the harshness of the land. The frontier would continue to challenge him, but he now rode with knowledge, courage, and the certainty that even in the vast emptiness of the world, strength could be found in partnership, trust, and shared experience. And as the sun climbed higher into the sky, painting the desert in brilliant gold and amber, the cowboy felt a quiet satisfaction. They had survived together, they had grown together, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. The Apache woman had reclaimed her freedom, and he had gained a deeper understanding of courage, resilience, and the power of trust. Their journey had ended for now, but the lessons they learned, the bond they shared, and the memories of their trials would remain, guiding them in all the paths they would walk from this day forward.